Welcome to part 2 of the People Power Revolution, which will focus on the actual events that occurred during the so-called revolution. If you want to know about the background and the events that led to the People Power Revolution, check out part 1 linked in the description. General civil disobedience first began after Corazon Aquino held a People's Victory rally at the Luneta Park in Manila, where she called for a civil disobedience campaign and petitioned for her supporters to boycott enterprises in ties with Marcos. This rally was attended by more than 2 million people. This set into motion a failed military coup by the Reform the Armed Forces movement, which would assault the presidential palace and arrest Marcos. However, Marcos discovered the ringleaders of the plot, arrested them, and publicly displayed them. Shortly after, Cardinal Jaime Sin called for Filipinos to help the rebel leaders and to participate in protests in the city of Manila. This was credited as the main reason for the large numbers at the protests. In addition to this, many defected from Marcos' military, only further weakening him. Following this, there were reports that Marcos had left his palace, which was broadcast all over EDSA Avenue, where hundreds of thousands of people were protesting, hence the alternative name for the People Power Revolution being the EDSA Revolution. This led many to celebrate. However, soon after, Marcos appeared on TV through MBS4, which is the name for the state network of the Philippines, where he declared that he would not step down. However, during the broadcast, MBS4 suddenly went off air because the station was captured by rebels under Colonel Mariano Santiago, and the station was only repaired around noon the same day. By this time, the EDSA Avenue protest grew to more than 1 million people, while some sources say it was around 2 million people. In the late afternoon, rebel helicopters attacked Villamor Air Base, where they destroyed Marcos' assets, while another fired a rocket at the palace itself. By this time, most of the army had already defected, and balances tipped towards the rebels. As a result, the armed forces of the Philippines were ready to mount an airstrike and a counterattack. Surprisingly, however, Marcos ordered General Fabian Ver, the leader of the AFP, to halt the strike. The next day, Aquino was inaugurated as the president of the Philippines in a small ceremony held at Club Filipino, hosted by Senior Associate Justice Claudia T. Henke. From Club Filipino to EDSA, hundreds of people celebrated at the news. Many wore yellow, the color of Aquino's campaign, and sang popular folk songs on the streets. In response, Marcos held his own inauguration in his palace, attended by his loyal supporters, which was aired in many channels, yet was interrupted after rebel troops caught many radio stations and interrupted the broadcast through that method. This was the last time that Marcos was seen in the Philippines. Although they held an inauguration, the Marcoses had planned to flee the country. Marcos called U.S. Senator Paul Lexalt, asking for advice on what to do, and asked him to transfer him to the White House. Lexalt told him to cut clean, after which Marcos called Minister Enrile, asking for safe passage to flee for him, his family, and close allies. Marcos left Manila around midnight and left for Angeles City, just north of Manila, from where he asked Aquino if he can spend a few days in his native province. This was denied. President Ronald Reagan slammed Aquino for denying this request. The Marcos family then landed in Guam and Hawaii, where Marcos would spend the rest of his days. Citizens rejoiced in the streets with this news, and the palace itself was stormed after nearly a decade. After days of tension and decades of tyrannical rule in the Philippines, the People Power Revolution came to an end, and democracy was reborn.